Welcome to Scotland is Now Race to Zero, a two-day conference brought to you by Team Scotland, a partnership approach led by Scottish Development International and Scottish Government, in collaboration with city regions and key stakeholders. We hope that you have been able to join several of our sessions yesterday and earlier today, and full details of the programme and our fantastic speakers are all on our conference website, www.scotlandracetozero.co.uk. I am Mary Henderson from Scottish Development International, and I'm here to introduce our next and final session, which is Cities Countdown to COP. And I'd now like to hand over to Peter Lacy, Chief Responsibility Officer and Global Sustainability Services Lead at Accenture, who will be chairing the discussion. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mary. Wonderful to see this event. So great to be here on behalf of Accenture, and congratulations to Scottish Development International on starting the Race to Zero from a city perspective. I know that you've had now a number of different formats, including investor roundtables, including sector-focused panel sessions, and I think we're going to have a rich debate today. I think the newly appointed US climate envoy, John Kerry, has said how important Glasgow COP is as the best last chance saloon to act on the environment. So I think it's incredibly important that right across the board, we as business, as cities, as governments, get this right. Cities are hugely important, occupying only 2% of the world's land mass, but cities account for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions. Quite naturally, they have become the platform for human activity and interaction, for business, for commerce, for life, for working, for playing. And so with that in mind, I'm very pleased to say that we will be joined today by Councillor Susan Aitken, who's the leader of Glasgow City Council, by Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, by Shirly Rodrigues, Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment in the Greater London Authority, and William Peduto, who's the Mayor of Pittsburgh. Attracting capital is a strategic priority for Scotland. We were just talking before in the virtual green room, these days green rooms are virtual rather than physical, about how important it is for the COP event to be a two-way dialogue about how cities from around the world are able to showcase what they're doing and attract investment, and Scotland and Glasgow is able to do the same. What I want us to get out of today in the discussion is that we are able to highlight this role of cities in achieving net zero, that we're identifying the scale of investment that is needed to achieve net zero in the timeframes that we need, and then to emphasize the importance not just of cities going it alone, but the collaboration and sharing and best practice that, for example, is embedded in our program with the World Economic Forum that is around net zero cities, sponsored by cities and by business. So that's just by way of objectives and background. So let's get into the conversation today. Let me start with a question for Councillor Susan Aitken. So you must be very excited about Glasgow becoming very much the centre of attention for the world on climate change and the journey to net zero. As the host city, what is Glasgow doing to attract capital investment to reach net zero as we head towards COP26? And in your view, what is it that the audience needs to know about how the event will help to push Glasgow's own agenda forward?
And thanks very much, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. I had the privilege of taking part in one of these sessions yesterday, and I'm delighted to be back. Thanks to SDI for having me back again. Yes, obviously we think Glasgow is the centre of the universe all the time, but certainly for the next few months until November, we really are, and that's an enormous responsibility as well as an enormous privilege. I think it's clear that there is an increasing global consensus that COP26 has to be the COP of action, going beyond targets and onto the practicalities of what we actually need to deliver our transition to net zero and to the low carbon economy of the future. And the next decade is going to be absolutely critical in terms of really scaling up those necessary interventions. And I think this final session of this programme really gets to the crux of that, the financing and the urgency that's required for cities like Glasgow and the other cities that are here today to be investment ready. COP is, I think already is a defining moment for Glasgow, and it will become even more so. I think it also will be for our peer cities around the world. And I've often spoken about how Glasgow's industrial past, our renaissance and our onward journey actually makes us the ideal COP host. But it's really symbolic today to be sharing a platform with cities with whom we have a real common history and experience. Manchester, Pittsburgh, Glasgow, we're all titans of the industrial age. You know, our story is of cotton and steel and ships, but then also how sport, culture, the arts, learning and innovation have helped us re-emerge from the damage and despair really of deindustrialisation and to flourish again. But whenever Bill Peduto or Andy Burnham or I discuss the climate emergency, the critical impact of cities is absolutely central. Cities, we're literally the heat map where the majority of people are living, working, travelling and making emissions, but we're also where change and innovation happens and where the greatest gains on emissions reduction and bang for that investment buck can be found. So that addressing the climate emergency in many parts of the world is an urban agenda. Certainly in the early years, we need to front load it in cities. And particularly in countries that have the kind of challenging targets that Scotland and the UK have. So, you know, as the host city leader, I've been saying at all these events that I've been invited to, you know, nation states pledge, cities deliver. So it's great as well that Shirley's here today to talk about what a city like London, which is again on so much bigger a scale and so much more influence, is doing. You know, we've got all those different city experiences here. I think it's clear that carbon neutrality, the carbon reduction, can't be discussed any longer as solely just a concept or a challenge. It is now about specific projects required to deliver it. And we need to talk about how those interventions can be financed and packaged as clear investable propositions. And I think this isn't an entirely new space for local government to operate within, but it does remain unusual for us. And it's certainly unusual for us to be looking at how to secure the pace and scale of transformation that our net zero ambitions are going to require. Some really big projects within the space of a decade. And I think it's also still a newish space for the financial and investment markets in many ways. And because investment in the kind of infrastructure that we need, whether that's district heating systems, energy retrofitting of residential and business properties, tidal barrages, which is one of the things that we want in Glasgow, new transport modes, infrastructure for electric or hydrogen fueled vehicles. All of those, they're not traditional investments, and the source of the financial return isn't always immediately obvious in a way that housing development or a hotel is. So I think we're all taking early steps into this new space, and it will involve cities seeking agreement with potential funders about the benefits of the outcomes of their investments and creating common goals and shared commitments and collaborations between the public and private sector. And it certainly, I think our view in Glasgow is that we want to appeal for activist investment. And I think those doors are already opening. We're getting a strong sense of that already. There is a growing appreciation within the public and private sector that this is also about investing in a modern economy. And while the cost of doing combined COVID recovery and zero carbon transition right is going to be significant, it's nothing to what it will cost if we don't do it right, and we don't get it right over the next decade, in particular, that crucial decade.
Yeah.
And then it struck me at some of the recent events that I've spoken at, the counterparts like San Sebastian, Barcelona, Helsinki, that those projects that we in Glasgow require to make headway are much the same elsewhere, and no doubt across much of the world. So I think it makes perfect sense that the likes of the World Bank, the C40 network, other global institutions and networks are responding to that. we all need help to deliver the financial tools that are needed for decarbonisation. I think what's less clear right now is how applicable any of the emerging models might be to UK cities, whether we have sufficient autonomy around borrowing powers, relationships with financial institutions, and whatever kind of financial instruments are required to support that. And certainly next week, the core cities network, which Glasgow and Manchester are members of, the 10 biggest UK cities outside London, we're going to kick off some discussions with representatives from the city governments, but also experts in international development, the financial sector and philanthropy as well, to really address this issue and where the levers might lie. And ahead of that, there's a meeting with COP26 President Alok Sharma and other UK city leaders in just a few days' time, which Andy's also going to be attending. And I think there's a real opportunity there to accelerate this agenda. One outcome I'd really like to see from that session is an instruction from Alok to UK government civil servants to pick up the phone to city finance and inward investment teams and really open that dialogue with us on funding and keep engaging with us. COP26 obviously isn't just about Glasgow, and it's not about policies. It's about Pittsburgh, it's about Manchester, it's about London, it's cities across the globe sharing their knowledge, their skills, enterprise experience, and really working in collaboration with investors, with the private sector, with that activist investment community, to lead the way on that concrete action that's necessary to secure the future of our planet. It's as simple as that, and as enormous as that.
Yeah.
And how we resource it is going to be absolutely critical.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. I think that's a brilliant opening. It sets out so much of the landscape we need to talk about in terms of shared past across cities and hopefully shared future as we tackle some of the biggest issues that you mentioned. Particularly, I think we want to come back as we go through the dialogue to some of the themes that you mentioned, such as deploying these new fourth industrial revolution technologies. Some of the cities here were so much at the first and second and third industrial revolutions. How do we find the financing and the innovation and the public-private partnerships to deploy that to this in a way that actually brings not just net zero, but many other benefits to cities? So brilliant start. Thank you very much. Let me turn to Andy. Good to talk to you again, Andy. Andy, obviously Manchester Mayor. What is Manchester doing, Andy, to attract capital investment to reach net zero as we head to COP26? And in your view, I mean, I think Susan laid out well the fact that the city agenda and the race to zero on cities is clearly already, the gun has been fired and people are already having multiple meetings through the next few weeks and over the next 6 months. But how do you see it as playing an important role in pushing the agenda forward?
Oh, thanks, Peter. Afternoon, everybody. Great to hear Susan on such good form, and we want to support Susan in Glasgow in any way we can to make COP everything we need it to be for Glasgow, for the UK, and for the world, actually. And brilliant to see a friend, Bill Peduto, on the call. I think we met in New York a couple of summers ago. Fantastic to see you, Bill. And before you joined, Susan was saying how much we all have in common as cities, and London too. Great to see you, Shirley. So we've obviously laid some important foundations over the last few years in Greater Manchester with regard to our ambitions. We were definitely the home of the first industrial revolution, and the kind of feeling is, well, why can't we be a big player in the fourth? We've set 2038 as our city region target, and it's not a political target. Actually, it's a science-based target, which is reasonably unique. I think not every city has a science-based target, but we have got one led by the Tyndall Centre at Manchester University. In terms of what we're doing, though, to up our game a little, Peter, running into the COP, and to make sure that we go with the most credible proposal that we can, thinking very much about what Susan just said about presenting people with investable propositions, which I think is important. We've recently expanded out our sort of, we don't want to be too parochial, if you like, and just think about, because there's no point being competitive in this space. There's a little bit of competition maybe, but, we are racing with each other to get to zero, but equally, we're going to get there more quickly if we help each other. We broadened it into a Northwest initiative now. So there's an organisation called Net Zero Northwest has now been launched. It's industry-led. It's chaired by the head of Siemens UK. Big industry partners are on it. Electricity Northwest, Cadent, the gas supplier. And we are now coming in as public bodies as part of it, because we want to go to Glasgow with a kind of incredible array of opportunities really across both Greater Manchester, the Liverpool city region. My good friend Steve Rotherham is promoting a tidal barrier as well, Susan, to see if there is a tie up there, Liverpool to Glasgow with the heritage, the shipbuilding heritage there, which might be relevant. Steve and I are also collaborating on a scheme with Cadent, one of the certainly the UK's, but possibly Europe's first major hydrogen pipelines using the River Mersey, and then carbon capture and storage. The idea is to bring it right the way into Greater Manchester, to Trafford Park, one of the biggest industrial estates in Europe. And we're looking for funding from UK government for that project at the moment. We think it's got huge potential, and we're working with them. So basically, if I just briefly kind of summarise it in three ways, we've got 2038 and we've got Net Zero Northwest, which is working now with Liverpool aligned with us. On energy, I've just described what we're doing. We think we're the first city region to have a formal agreement with our energy suppliers, Electricity Northwest and Cadent, who are signed up to that 2038 timetable. I don't think anyone else has managed that yet. We've got alignment with them, and we're working with those energy providers to get the regulator on board as well, Ofgem, to be able to support them with the regulatory context to enable them to make the capital investments. So it's quite a big deal, and we're keen to say more at COP about it, because it will require significant investment in the grid if we're able to achieve it. Just very quickly, Peter, on transport, we've just finished consulting on the largest clean air zone in the country, which will cover all 10 of our boroughs. So we expect to go to COP with a significant proposal that also is an opportunity for major electric vehicle charging. Alongside it, we want to use the advent of the clean air zone to kickstart the complete reform of public transport in Greater Manchester and move to obviously electric buses, as many cities are saying, integrating buses with our tram system, running it all on renewable energy. That's the vision. So there is a transport vision coming through as well. Buildings, I think a little less to report, but some progress. We've started a public sector retrofit programme where councils and other public bodies are retrofitting their buildings, which in the end we want to build out into the kind of retrofitting scheme that Susan described, a very much a domestic retrofitting program. Now it's complex because you need to kind of build back into the FE and the skills system to make sure that numbers of people are coming through to be able to support an ambitious retrofitting program of that kind. The budget, it wasn't helpful to see £2 billion chopped out of the Green Homes grant. I think that was a bit of a backward step. Also, surprisingly, the government sidelining the industrial strategy. That seemed to be an odd thing to do at this particular moment in time. So buildings, I think we need to kind of focus a bit more. But in all of those areas, energy, transport, buildings, we will be bringing forward opportunities to the COP. And I'm just going to finish by saying it's very much in some ways to set up Bill, I guess, in terms of what Bill might say. I think the COP is transformed for having a US president in office and administration that is going to come and enthusiastically lead the debate, push everybody to make it a success. This is a major moment for the world, and it's going to happen in the UK and in Glasgow. It's fantastic that that's happening. I have a belief that in 100 years' time, people will look back to Glasgow 2021 and say that was a moment of major acceleration of progress towards a zero carbon society and economy. Why? Because post-pandemic, we've all got the kind of challenge about job creation. We need to find new industry. We need to kind of get on with that and bring on the future because of the need to create jobs. And I think this is the key thing for me, that COP, if we can land this at COP, I think this is where we will really sort of make progress. We've got to stop the climate agenda being seen as a burden on business, a burden on individuals, on families, it's a thing to do if you're middle class and you can afford it. We've got to turn this debate around now as it being the route through which we give people better lives. We lower the cost of living for people by retrofitting their homes. We lower the cost of running a vehicle for people by helping them switch to a cleaner vehicle, or we give them better public transport. I think we've got to start thinking about climate justice alongside social justice, that these two things are one and the same. They're not in conflict in any way, shape or form. And we solve the climate crisis by solving the jobs crisis, by kind of training up a new generation of young people with those green construction, retrofitting, modern methods of construction skills. That's the opportunity here. And I think if the old industrial cities of the world can kind of come together and kind of really galvanize ourselves to lead that, then I think it's fantastically exciting. So yeah, all power to your elbow, Susan. We're right behind you. It's really becoming quite exciting what the COP26 might achieve. And Greater Manchester, as part of Net Zero Northwest, we will be very, very enthusiastic participants. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think you've raised a lot of really important issues for us to debate on. I think I'd sort of link your ending to your beginning, which is that somewhere we took a wrong turn over the last decade and made net zero political, whereas it's science-based, right? And you setting a science-based target as a city, which, as you rightly say, is not that common, but is becoming more the norm in business as well. This isn't a politics issue at many levels. Of course, there are elements of politics, but this is a science-based issue. You won't remember this, I'm sure, because of the number of meetings you have. Last time you and I met, we actually met in Tianjin in China. And I think, as well as William's president being actually at the table, which I do think is so important for COP, so important, but actually the 2030, 2060 goal that China has also set now to become a net zero power, you put those two things together, and I think it supports your point about COP26 being seen, looking back, as I hope the breakthrough. And I think Susan's point about, maybe governments are where the policy is set, but you guys are the ones who've got to deliver it and execute it, is a good conversation to have, because there's many practical initiatives. As well as that private sector finance. I think that's something else I want to talk about a bit more, because, at the moment, only a quarter of the 6 trillion a year to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals is being financed publicly. So we've got a 4.5 trillion or 3/4 gap that we need capital markets, business, financial players, investors, as Susan mentioned, to step in and fill that gap, and you guys to have investable propositions. So lots to talk about there. Let me move quickly to Shirly Rodrigues. So thank you, Shirly, for joining, Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment in London. Huge city, much complexity to deal with, but also one that I know has got COP26 very much on its mind as an important staging post. What do you, Shirly, see COP playing by way of a role for you in setting your net zero target, delivering against that, and how are you leveraging that in your own plans?
Thanks, Peter, and thank you, SDN, for inviting me to be on the panel today. And great company, obviously, with Andy, Bill, and Susan. Well, COP26 is absolutely uppermost in our mind, but so is the recovery from the pandemic and how do we build back better. So Sadiq has set a political target of net zero carbon city by 2030. So I disagree with you slightly, Peter, in saying we need obviously science-based and evidence pathways, which we have in our 1.5 degree plan in London. But to get the people behind you, you've really got to set that political target and say, go for it. And in this decade of action, that 2030 or 2038 target really just shows that you have to move faster. And what I'm really pleased to say is that we've set up a sort of governance process for recovering London post-pandemic, and everybody around that table, from business to academia to some of the other institutions in London, NHS and so on, have signed up to that target because they know how important it is. And as I've said, as many have said on the call, we have to look at our energy system, how we manage our energy, how we decarbonise our energy system, heat, transportation, but also not forgetting the importance of making our city resilient to the effects of climate change. And adaptation to climate change is really going to be high up on the COP26 agenda. It keeps getting forgotten. So how we respond to that, nature-based solutions. It's the year of the biodiversity COP as well. They're all integrated, absolutely integrated, and we need to remember that. So in London, we've started well in trying to use our own funding and grant programs. We've created the world's first ultra-low emissions zone. I see Andy's been consulting on a bigger area, but we're going to be expanding ours in October, retrofitting our public buildings. We've got social housing programs. We're looking at building out energy networks, more cycling and walking routes, and looking also at finance and how we use divestment, the sort of narrative and discussion around divestment, to really focus funding into responsible investment. And the good news is that in the UK, we have a world-leading financial sector and in the City of London, but we really need to mobilise that funding and deploy it to support climate-related projects at the size and scale we need to get to net zero. And public sector finance just won't be able to do this. So we need your help, the investors on the call today, and government in terms of setting those regulation and incentives to help us. We've estimated in London we just need in the order of over £60 billion worth of investment to meet our 1.5 degree plan, which was a 2050 target. Obviously, if you want to accelerate that, and also as we look to a green recovery from COVID-19, it's going to need more and to be deployed sooner. In terms of recovery, the Mayor, as Andy and Susan have both said, is that that we have to tackle the climate emergency as well as look to our economic and social recovery, and that goes hand in hand with a green recovery. Inequalities, tackling those inequalities that have been really highlighted by that pandemic is absolutely critical. So we think renewing our drive to tackle the climate emergency is going to help us provide good quality jobs, that just transition, but also look to making London a more livable and more welcoming city, bring back business confidence in coming back to this, to the city, but also attracting foreign visitors and businesses to come and relocate here, particularly post-Brexit. We've got a really strong basis to start from. Our green economy in London is worth around £50 billion worth in sales, employs over 300,000 people, in a range of sectors. So we've got a great basis to start from. But we have an ambition to double that green economy at least. Through many of the issues that Andy talked about, from retrofitting through to really electrifying our transport network, our bus fleet, for example. We've lobbying government for £1 billion worth of investment, which would mean that all of our bus network would be electrified. That's 9,500 buses. And that would help jobs, not just in London, but would really help manufacturing jobs in electric vehicles and charging infrastructure around the UK. So Falkirk, Ballymena, Leeds, Scarborough. This helps the levelling up agenda, but also helps us level up in London too. So that's obviously in a big area of investment that we're looking to see how we might get government support for, but also private sector investment too. And that recovery board, is really important because it's a collaborative approach. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, co-chairs it with Georgia Gould, who's the leader of Camden and the leader of London Councils, the network organisation for the 33 London local authorities. And Susan mentioned about how important it was for COP to that collaborative effort. It is absolutely critical. We cannot do it alone in London at the Greater London Authority. We have to do it with everyone. All the stakeholders in London, but as Andy has said, working with others around the city, around the country as well. The Mayor has committed some funding to help kickstart this approach. We've got a Green New Deal fund, £10 million worth of which was allocated late last year to a range of projects, from retrofitting through to supersizing a heat network in North London in order to tackle some of these issues and secure some jobs. But part of that Green New Deal mission is a section or a sort of work stream we call Green Foundation. So it's partly about skills. How do we use the devolved adult education budget to upskill and get people skilled up in the new jobs? but also how do we mobilise more private finance? And I know that Scottish Development International are looking at ways to attract green investment. So we believe that we have to get the public and private sector partners together to share risk and return. And I've mentioned that 61 billion figure. We're partly doing it through creating a pipeline of investable projects through some of the programs we have. We have a series of accelerator programs around housing, workplaces, and also on energy networks. We've got the largest, I think, energy efficiency fund in the UK. It's a £500 million worth of fund, which the Mayor helped pump prime with £86 million worth of public sector funding. But then we managed to get the European Investment Bank and others to co-fund with us. Now, that's a great start, but it's nowhere near enough what we need. So we've been working now, commissioned the Green Finance Institute out of the City of London to help us identify how we can create that step change, both in the size of the pipeline of projects and the scale of private sector finance that we can get flowing into them. We've worked with London councils who have already identified £1 billion worth of shovel-ready projects, projects from retrofitting through to transportation, electric vehicle charging, and so on. The problem is they are, and this would be interesting, I think, for the conversation later, is that the challenge of agglomeration and the challenge of the scale isn't there yet to attract the finance. So what can we do to really boost that? And of course, the other part of this is how do we fund green space, nature-based solutions for adaptation, but also for biodiversity, an area that keeps getting forgotten. But I think we have to raise that up because we know how critical it is to us for climate reasons, but also for things like reducing our risks to future pandemics. So one of the areas that we've been working with is already working with institutional investors like our Pension Fund Authority and London Borough's pension funds to encourage them to champion divestment, really as a way of refocusing their minds on responsible investment. We've created and started creating a London fund, which will support some infrastructure, but not every borough is part of that yet, but we would like to do, see that happen. We've been working through the C40 to champion divestment and responsible investment across the globe. And I know Bill in Pittsburgh is one of the cities that recently committed to divest. And you may have seen New York's big announcement earlier this month. The Pension Fund Authority in London, we work very hard to make sure that they are pretty much divested. And as I said, we're now looking at more responsible investment. So I just want to end there, but really just to really emphasise that, I was at COP21, Paris, the Paris COP, where it was the COP of the non-state actors. So it was the COP of businesses, NGOs, and finance, and it really got the non-state actors on the agenda. But I remember being part of I worked for a philanthropy at that point, where we highlighted the big challenge of moving finance into cities, and yet we're still having that same conversation many years later. And I think, my ambition for COP, and I think all of us, is really how do we work with the private sector and government and other cities to really coalesce around that challenge and get that private sector finance with the public sector finance moving. So I'll leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Shirley. I think there's some brilliant points there. And having been part of the COP back to Copenhagen, when cities, I would say, really first came onto the scene as, I think, the real change agents at a time when the COP really failed, frankly. Copenhagen did fail, but actually what didn't fail was the role of cities. And as you rightly said, having seen that through Paris, it is disappointing that we aren't making more progress than we are, but it does feel like the time is right. I like a lot of what you said around shovel-ready projects, managing pipelines, also particularly as, I think you can only get to 54% of emissions globally by going through direct energy systems. A lot of the rest comes through biodiversity, comes through nature-based solutions, as you've highlighted, which I think that's going to be another important point at COP, I think, to broaden out that debate and that discussion. And where investable projects come from there is actually more complicated and more complex to some extent. So I think that's a good one to come back to. Now, let me move on, last but by absolutely no means least, on to Mayor William Peduto from Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for joining us. As the mayor from outside, all eyes, I think, on you guys at the moment as the big news in climate change globally. with President Biden, with John Kerry, with Kamala Harris, and a very, very different global and domestic agenda and outlook, including some substantial sustainability components to the recently, well, I'm not sure if you've passed it yet in Congress, but certainly the post-pandemic package that's being put together as well in terms of infrastructure. So tell us about Pittsburgh and how you're driving your ambitions, how you're getting to net zero, and how some of the partnership models in global cities that we're thinking about at COP, how does that help? How do you see it playing out?
Well, thank you, Peter. And first off, to Susan and to Andy, it is great to see both of you again. Shirley, thank you. And thank you for the leadership that you have been providing on a global basis. Hearing the words of my friends, I am just thrilled, in particular by the role that post-industrial cities are going to play in changing not only our climate challenges, but an entirely new economy. And I think that we share between our cities and the age that we are, this common experience of watching our cities go through an economic depression with deindustrialization, where we saw our friends and our family members have to leave, not because they wanted to, but because we didn't have jobs, because we didn't see the warning signs that were there for years about how the world was shifting and changing. And I believe that there is something that is a bond between all of us, including those that went through it in other continents, that we don't want to make the same mistake twice. We realize that the world is changing. We realize that the future only goes in one direction. And we realize that those areas that have been dependent upon fossil fuels have the potential to be the areas that are hurt the most. And boy, do we hear that all the time. But we don't hear how those areas have the benefit of being the areas that will be improved the most economically, not just to meet the goals of Paris, but to meet the goals of Paris through an economic development strategy that will actually increase the number of jobs in those areas. And so we have started in the United States. By the way, world, we're back. It's so good to be back with you. Can't imagine what those past 4 years were like. Oh man! But
it was
anyway.
bad enough for us. I don't know. I can't believe what it was like for you, Bill.
It's like living through somewhat of a nightmare and a comedy at the same time, but the comedy part was not funny.
I think that's what I meant by politics, more partisan politics than politics, and the role of politics more generally, I think.
And I want to talk about that for 1 minute, and then I'll get back into this economic development strategy. The areas that decided to elect Donald Trump as president were areas that were strong Democratic strongholds. Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, West Virginia, Northern Kentucky. I mean, this is where the labor movement was built. The United Mine Workers, the steel workers, the auto workers.
Yeah.
And why did they go to Donald Trump? Because when given the choice between a false hope and no hope, you will go with a false hope.
Yep.
And he said he was going to reopen the mines and reopen the factories and rebuild the steel mills. And what we gave as Democrats, and I am, was that we were going to turn you into coders. You were going to be able to do coding from your kitchen. Well, when you talk to the people that build America and the families and the generations that have a pride in that they are the builders, and you tell them they're going to become coders, you're tone deaf.
Yeah.
And so we lost that by not having this message that we're talking about now.
And Mike, could I just ask you on that? And I'm not going to stop you finishing the rest of your speech, but one of the questions that's come in from the panel speaks exactly to that, which is, can panel members share any thoughts on how you take your citizens on the journey in the race to zero, right? Because that is what you're talking about fundamentally there, is, false hope versus no hope versus, okay, here is a different world that looks still positive for you, that still builds on the strengths of the city in some of the heartlands.
I think it only happens at cities. I don't think this is like national, international policies. I think cities have the ability to bring together, in our case, the Sierra Club and the United Steelworkers, and to bring them together in a green-blue alliance that talks about good jobs, green jobs, and does it in a way that doesn't pit them against each other like the activists will do, but instead brings them together with this understanding that, yes, it may take a little bit longer to make that transition happen in an area that's been dependent upon coal and oil and gas, but it has the opportunity to be transformative. So what we've done is we've partnered with our area of Northern Appalachia and the Ohio Valley. We've partnered with Huntington, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Youngstown, Ohio, and Louisville, Kentucky. And we put together 8 mayors who have a shared vision of seeing this happen in a way that is just for the people, and especially the communities that will be left behind. Now, that won't be Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has already made our transformation, but go 30 miles, 40 miles from here, and you're going to be in rural areas that are still dependent on that coal mine. And we don't want to see them be left behind. We want them to be a part of it. So these 8 cities have created what is called the Marshall Plan for Middle America. General George Marshall is from Western Pennsylvania. And when the United States put together the Marshall Plan, it was to rebuild Western and Central Europe in a way that reinvested a lot of funds into it. But it also had a secondary mission, and that was a political mission. As the Soviet Union was growing, the United States wanted to have Western influence in those areas. And they realized that the best way to do so was to invest in it. And what we want to see is that type of a strategy being utilized here. A public-private initiative that will invest $600 billion over 10 years into the areas that will be the most hurt by the transition to renewable energy. It will invest in renewable energy opportunities that have been shown through the University of Pittsburgh, the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and Columbia University, that would change what we are on the path for, which is a loss of 100,000 jobs in the energy field to an increase of 400,000 jobs. And basically creating an economic development strategy around meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement.
And I think, Bill, I think one of the things you're getting to the point there is, and I'll ask you one more question, I will open it up a little bit, but I think that question that Mike Bonaventure in the questions has answered, I think that matters to investors. That's my experience, to know that there is some form of political stability and a serious plan for taking people, over political cycles, because the infrastructure investment that all of the other mayors have talked about, Susan and Andy Shirley have all talked about, they cannot be disrupted by a change in partisan politics over time. There has to be a long-term plan in order for private investors, at least, to feel comfortable. Have you had that conversation? How have you navigated some of that conversation?
Just had that conversation yesterday. So one of the largest solar companies in the United States is in the state next door to us in Ohio. And they are developing the largest solar array in the United States outside the city of Cincinnati. Not Los Angeles, not New York, Cincinnati. And that is going to power the entire city government operations of that city, plus the private part. So what we wanted to talk about is how do we then adapt that type of plan to start to create the hydrogen valley, the Ohio Valley of becoming the hydrogen valley, and working off of a system that transfers from gas to solar, and being able to build out not just the solar array, but the manufacturing of the solar panels. So we're not purchasing them from China. We're building them in Pittsburgh and creating that circular economy that basically understands that this economic opportunity is real, it's happening, and it's going to occur in the places that make that investment. We are so blessed, not only on the new administration in Washington in the White House, but that we have a Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who's from Indiana, a Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, who's from Michigan, a Secretary of Housing, who's from Cleveland. They're from this region, and they understand the economic opportunity. So look, we have an appropriations budget coming up where we're finally, cities in the United States are going to have a voice back into what that looks like. And then we're talking about a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that will be coming up this fall. And Washington is looking for the cities and the regions in the United States that have a plan to invest in.
And that's a little bit going back to Shirley's point about shovel ready and having the pipeline, right? I mean, whether it's public or private investors, you want that. Let me come back to some of the other panelists. I'm going to ask for some short, sharpened responses to some of the questions coming in, but also I'm going to add one of my own as well. So you can answer this in different ways, I think, Shirley, Susan, Andy. One panelist, Catherine Sugar, has asked, do panelists think they have enough powers and capacity, essentially, as mayors and as regional, as regional government to deliver the ambitions? And maybe, William, this is maybe more a UK question, I think, in this particular case, in the different layers of governance, to meet the needs and deliver the ambitions of net zero. And I guess I would twist that and just ask you if there is anything that you do not have. And you mentioned you're meeting ALOC, and you mentioned that there's various conversations going on. What would you want to have by way of powers that would help to unlock that investment of private capital? So maybe let's start with that one first, and just 30-second, 1 minute answers from any of you. Feel free to go first, whoever would like to.
So I think
go on, Susan.
I'm going to mess this up as the moderator. So let's let Susan go first, then Andy, then Shirley. 1 minute max each.
Okay, I think I'm in a slightly different position from Andy and Shirley in that I'm not a metro mayor or a city mayor. I'm a leader of
the council. Correct. Yeah. Sure.
And Scotland only has unitary local authorities. But I've already started this conversation with Scottish Government. Glasgow and the Glasgow metropolitan region is the only metropolitan region in Scotland, arguably the only one north of Andy's, real true metropolitan region. And I do think that we need something that gives us that extra leverage, that gives us the ability to control land and to control, also to maximise the impact of the public sector investment that we are making, a lot of which is, and it's back to that point about being a post-industrial area, a lot of it is in remediating and reclaiming and mitigating the legacies of our post-industrial past. And that's something that we have to do. And as we raise the value of land and space by doing that, we don't have the ability at the moment to really capture that and then reinvest it. I think what I would like for Glasgow is something like, a development corporation type special purpose vehicle, essentially for a decade or maybe a little bit more, a special purpose vehicle to drive the infrastructure mission that we require to deliver net zero and to deliver the just transition, and with all those new green jobs that Bill was talking about as well, which are absolutely crucial. It's an equitable transition, climate justice and social justice hand in hand. That's what we need.
I like that a lot. Very concrete.
No, I don't have those powers, but I'm thinking very hard.
That's a very concrete ask. I like that. The special purpose vehicle for a limited period of time, focused on bringing all those different things together. Andy, I think I gave you the second one.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant. What Susan just said, I fully agree and see where she's coming from. I was fascinated listening to Bill. I think there's so much for us to learn there in terms of the partnership between the, is it correct to say the Rust Belt mayors? Is that what you would describe them as, Bill? I mean, it's just definitely a model, Susan, isn't it? That we don't collaborate enough, I don't think, cities across all of the UK, but particularly the post-industrial cities. And I did say to Susan, if there was more we could do to look at, tie it all together. And so anyway, but I think there's something for us there, Bill. But I could say so much in answer to your question, but I'm going to pick up on one thing, because I bet it's a challenge for Bill and his colleagues as well, and it's skills. If you're going to have that level of industrial ambition that has just been articulated and that we have, you have to control your post-16 skills system, and you have to be able to commission your colleges to put in place the courses that will bring through people in, either retrain older adults. So we've got the adult education budget under our control in Greater Manchester, so we've got a bit of it, but we've not got the bit that's the 16-year-olds coming through. And I think if we're going to do this properly, you would have to have full local control, I would say, of post-16 education, so that you could both build training programs with FE colleges in the right number, but also a quality of retraining for those older workers who Bill was talking about as feeling dislocated and angry and alienated. Absolutely critical. And it sometimes gets missed, I think, in this climate debate. Skills it is central to it, because the fear is here. We're not going to have the trained individuals to do all of this stuff. This is massive undertakings that we're talking about. And it needs a skills system that can feed the demand for talent and training. And Andy, we haven't got that.
Would that be, in your view, and again, I love super concrete, would that sort of skills body and retraining and reskilling the, certain parts of the economy, both some of the sort of the older generation and the newer generation, would that be something that you would be thinking more at the Northwest level, at the Manchester level, or more at the sort of the level of the Rust Belt mayors kind of level that Bill raised?
I think it'd be at our level, to be honest, because it's, Greater Manchester is a sort of functioning sort of geography, travel to work, so, and we've got, 10 or so big FE providers. We've got 5 universities who are really knitted in, and more, they work as a system. They are coming together more and more, not fighting as individual entities. So yes. I think we would do it as a GM system, to be honest. We've got the adult education budget, and we're using it now for conversion courses towards digital retraining or green retraining.
Well, I was just going to build on your point and ask you whether or not, because a lot of the conversation here has been about investment, would you imagine a public and private investment in education and skills in that sense? Could you imagine that, or are you thinking more public education? No,
definitely. But it's about allowing industry to kind of specify what it needs, so that you have a really tight partnership, a network between your business industry players, big and small, kind of feeding in to say, well, here is the skills requirement. These are the skills that we need. And then we commission those from our FE and HE system. And that level of join up just isn't there at the moment, Peter, at all. And I think the skills challenge is possibly a bit overlooked.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a really big part of this, particularly as we're heading into a post-pandemic time where there's going to be an urgency about job creation. Is the skills system up to responding quickly enough? I don't think so at the moment.
I think a neat bridge. I love it. Special purpose vehicle skills, neat bridge back to Shirly. You emphasise the post-pandemic, but what particular power would you like to see to unlock that potential of public-private investment?
I would probably say, well, for a start, I would say government really needs to give us the long-term framework. So pulling the industrial strategy. We still don't have a heat strategy. We don't know where we are with funding. All of these things aren't conducive for us to take the accelerated action we need. We are doing the best we can do with the powers we have. The mayor only has control over 50% of the emissions in London. A lot of them we could do more with if powers were devolved to us, and if government got on with the bits that it's doing. But I think probably the single biggest lever that we've had is transportation. And I would say putting funding and the powers for all cities and city leaders to act on their transportation system, devolving those powers, getting, and you've probably know about the Transport for London funding debate that we are having at the moment. So putting that aside, but just giving cities the ability to do that would allow us, for example, to commission those electric buses that would then provide the jobs elsewhere, but would help us reduce carbon emissions. I agree with Andy, skills is really important. As we mentioned, we've got control of the adult education budget, but going further, I think would be helpful. Talking to businesses about what the skills are that they need. But, one of the things I think is also some public sector sort of clarity. So we've commissioned some research, and some interim research was published earlier this week, I think, or last week, around where's the impact of COVID happened. So we know it's in West London because of the impact on Heathrow Airport, but the supply chain to Heathrow. We know we're a very service-based economy, and unlike some of the other cities on the call. How do we support those high carbon sectors to become more low carbon, and how do we provide people with the skills to move into those jobs? And some of that will be modern methods of construction, but also some of the tech and engineering and clean tech type of jobs as well. So we start to know what they are, but we need the ability to get on with that. So devolving.
That's great. So transport and the control of transport, so that you don't sort of have mixed messages, and also you can have clearer private public sector investments over time. I can see that. Bill, let me. So whilst I'm asking Bill this question, each of you're going to get 20 seconds, 30 seconds at the very end of the panel to say what do you want most to come out of COP, right? So that's how we're going to finish. But Bill, in the US. You've had a lot of experience in public and private sector finance over a long period of time, a longer period of time to some extent than the UK has. And there have been upsides and downsides of that, as we've seen in different cities in the US. But what would you say, what have you learned about what powers really work, as you've got more and more over time in the US system of governance?
I would say it's very simple. It's collaboration. I always say that, a river doesn't run through a rock, it goes around it. And the job of a mayor is to be able to build that collaboration around, so that when you present an idea to the federal government, there isn't opposition. Mm-hmm. The federal government doesn't want to have to be in a position of choosing which side to support. What they want is something that has universal support around it, which makes the job of a mayor so absolutely critical. Anything that we're talking about, you can create the programs at federal levels that will do workforce development, that will fund green new initiatives, that will do whatever, gets implemented on the local level. And so at the local level, it is absolutely critical to have the ability to build that consensus. What I would like to see come out of COP.
Yeah, brilliant. You start, Bill, please. Yeah,
is a new emphasis on subnationals. Just as the largest gathering of mayors in the world's history happened at COP21, which I was proud to be a part of. It is absolutely incumbent that cities, nonprofits, philanthropic community, institutions like hospitals and universities, corporations, all of the different entities that are going to be the responsible organizations of reducing our carbon footprint have a much greater role in this discussion than just what the federal policies and the agreements between nations will be. Because as the United States showed, when our government left the Paris Agreement, the mayors across America, Democrat and Republican, said we're still in. And we still made sure that our commitment was there.
That was very much my experience after COP in Copenhagen as well. That was the one bright spot that came out, was the mayors, in my view. I'm going to give the last word to Susan as the host for Glasgow. So let's go to Shirley and then Andy. That 20 seconds, 30 seconds, what would you like to see out of COP?
Completely echo what Bill said. It's got to be cities don't sideline the cities. We've been sidelined too long. We are huge centres of consumption of emissions, but huge centres of action. We were initiated the C40, and it's great to see so many cities now in that. So just take advantage of us. And
I would add what you've all been saying, which is hugely attractive, potentially, centres for investment. Right? I think, Andy.
It's just been brilliant being part of this panel, to be honest. I think it's fantastic to hear Shirley, Bill, Susan, and yourself, Peter. What would I want? I think, if I'm honest, a new narrative, a better narrative coming out about how this is the route to giving people a better job, a better home, better health, and a better life. So the quicker you make progress on this, the more you are going to deliver things that have damaged people's health in the pandemic. The lack of a good job, the lack of a good home means you've not. This is, climate justice, social justice, as Susan said before. We've got to make that real for people. People have got to believe that coming out of COP, that if you accelerate on your ambitions on zero carbon, you are quickening the pace towards giving people all of those things, which too many of our citizens currently don't have.
Thank you, Andy. That's brilliant. The narrative shift, I think, is an imperative. And Susan, I'll let you finish off before I hand back. So, Susan, what would you like to see out of COP26 as the councillor for Glasgow?
Oh, I agree with everything that that Bill and Andy and Shirley have said, but I would add to it, I suppose, that I would like to see a tangible legacy for the citizens of Glasgow. But beyond that, a Glasgow Accord or a Glasgow agreement that comes out of those negotiations, that we are not going to be embarrassed to have our name associated with for decades to come, that actually delivers on the Paris Agreement and that delivers what the planet needs and particularly what people who are suffering loss and damage from climate change right now need urgently.
Well, listen, thank you so much to all of the panelists. I think thank you so much to the organisers for pushing this together, for putting this together in the city's countdown to COP. I think the Scottish Development International have done a great job here. I'd also like to call out Martin Valenti as well, who I think is doing a sterling job, and from Accenture side, appreciate the involvement, as does the World Economic Forum's Net Zero Cities programme. Thank you all to the mayors. I hope that we achieve all the things that you asked for and beyond, and that we start to unlock some of that incredible investment that we need to enable you to really deliver on the ground. So with that, thank you to all the people who've been listening in, and I hope many of you are investors, and I hope many of you are thinking about getting your checkbooks out and thinking about how you can help. With that, we will pass back to Marie.
Cheers, Peter. Good to see you, Bill.
Nice to see
Good
you.
to see you.
Bye, Susan. Bye,
Bye.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the panel for an insightful and inspirational discussion. And thank you, audience, for joining us. That now concludes our Scotland is Now Race to Zero 2-day conference, but does not conclude the conversation. Please use the Get in Touch section in the programme to access the team email address and get in touch. Speak with the team. We welcome inquiries from any investors, developers or stakeholders who are interested in the projects mentioned over the course of the 2 days. Or if you would like more information about investing in Scotland, please do get in touch. Thank you, and we look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Goodbye.